So hi, I'm Joanna from GSN Planet. Welcome to our webinar. Happy to be here with my very dear friend, Mickaela Grace, who is the founder of Graceline Institute, an artivist, a filmmaker, an all-around amazingly talented woman that we are so incredibly privileged to get to share with our GSN family. So thanks for joining us today, Mickaela.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to talk to you all.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about our upcoming Kripalu event and also a little bit about what emotional intelligence is. So I'd love for you to start by telling our audience a little bit about Graceline and a little bit about your work and kind of what's led you up to where we are.
Awesome. So I essentially had the privilege of having a healer come into my life when I was very young, when I was 8 years old, and sort of set me on a course or on a path not to be tied too much to one tradition, but to essentially look for truth and to bow to no authority and to depend on myself to be on a constant quest and sort of persistent mission to find my own answers to all things. And so I was able to train on 5 continents and sort of collect data and information and really find kind of a crossroads where spirituality and science meets. And so with about 25 years of experience in the alternative medicine field, essentially, I decided to combine that curriculum and find a way to bring really relatable neuroscience, epigenetics, quantum physics, spiritual traditions, meditation, self-healing, and basically thought patterning and sort of human potentiality ideas all under one umbrella. For a not so hidden mission to hopefully turn each human that we meet into a more informed member of the electorate and an environmentalist. So that's sort of the dream and core foundational principles of the Graceline Institute. So what the Institute is really about, our tagline is consciousness, equality, ecology. So that 3-act arc of human development is to essentially give tools, self-empowering tools for people to raise their own consciousness, drop ego and personal narrative, drop story, actually get old catabolic emotion, stuck emotion, catastrophic emotion out of the cellular tissue of the body, and to essentially kind of deinstall software, install new software, like reboot the system so that we're finding higher forms of electricity and energy, because essentially electricity and immunity are the same thing. They're bound together. So that 3-act arc is about raising consciousness, dropping story, getting to a state of equality where we see ourselves as not any less important or more important than anyone else, but we essentially are not only on our own individual evolutionary path, but we're on a collective evolutionary path, and we're sort of one cell in a wider organism of humanity. I like to say in meditation that we are sort of feathers on the wing of the same bird. That idea that the more that we come into union and communion with each other, the stronger vehicle we are for moving forward on an evolutionary level, and to then eventually get to that 3rd stage, which is ecology and being a more active and informed citizen and community member, parent, spouse, lover, you name it. So, so we're looking at higher happiness as essentially a form of service, and emotional intelligence, or EI, so not intelligence or IQ, but EQ, is about basically kind of becoming your own badass, essentially, and being an adult. And I say that lovingly, but we sort of are trying to grow people up. And at the Institute, we're sort of bringing forward this idea, this concept that you're always going to be your own best friend, best advocate, best bullshit detector, best physician, best sort of, version of yourself if you're able to raise emotional intelligence, raise maturity, get out of reactivity, and have a balanced adulthood, like imbued in the cells of the body. So that's a very long, verbose answer to your question, but that's the nuts and bolts of it.
So how did you first come to sort of explore EQ, right? Like how did that sort of fit in, and what was the impetus, and talk about that.
Cool. So, as I was bumping around the world studying with curanderas and witch doctors and healers and shaman and theologians and activists, and, training with like Gandhi's great granddaughter, and how she was, working with AIDS patients in South Africa, and what she was doing to essentially care for those who weren't being cared for. And her way of doing that was to be really loving on a whole other level, right? Compassion on a whole other level, heart coherence on a whole other level. What I realized is that I saw really big bursts in my own ability to heal my physical body or get out of suffering if I focused not so much on a physical ailment or chasing a symptom, but if I dropped story. And so my favorite teaching from A Course in Miracles is nothing happens to you but for you. So if I could stop and slow down and take a wider view of any event, any conflict, any obstacle, and I took that step back to basically say, what can I learn from this? Why is this happening for me? Where is there repetition of perhaps a dynamic that's been here before? How am I participating? What's my 50% of this sort of shadow work, or how can I manage my acre and take responsibility for my half of this dynamic? The more that I could slow down and get into an investigative place about what was happening, I would have these epiphanies that would almost instantly lift me up on a physical level as well. And so what we focus on at the Institute is making sure that we're really thorough in healing work and that we are clearing data, like actually clearing memory, cellular memory on all 4 layers of the electromagnetic field. So whenever you have an event happen, you are storing data on a very visceral level, a physical level in the body, right? Especially if there was trauma related to it, you have all this little data in the limbic part of the brain that says, I never want this event to happen again, so I'm going to be cautionary with these elements at play. You're receiving genetic information to the physical body that's all about how your caretakers handled stress. And so you have very physical, visceral protection mechanisms in place. And then you also have emotions that are stored in neuropeptides, or that are chemicals, reactions to things. You have emotion that is stored in fat cells or adipose cells, adipose tissue, where your body is sort of not wanting to feel a certain emotion and suppressing it. And so you wrap a fat cell around it to buffer it off. And so all of that data, sort of that unprocessed or static emotion, stays in the field, informing your base personality or base narratives. And then you have essentially belief patterns and operating software, right? You have an intellectual response to the events of your life. And then you have a total energetic, like in the quantum field, in the grid, you actually have weakened electrical states and tears to the field and things like that, that are also having an impact on overall well-being. So what I found in my own personal work is that if I approached any event through the lens of evaluating where that was registering in all 4 ways, and I did that work internally myself to sort of like miqui or mulch or transcend or transfer that information into something higher, I made a declaration to kind of let go of something and install something else by choice. My physical body, not only did I get over things faster, but my physical body started healing itself of a lot of different complicated ailments, including some autoimmune issues. So I started out working on myself, and then was able to just make what I was learning all over the world a little bit more manageable with easier curriculum to follow.
So you've now developed this into a program that you call EQ, and it's really, if you were to take it at the Institute, I know this because we work together, it's an 8-part series, right?
Yes. So EQ is not, emotional intelligence has been around for a long time as sort of a catchphrase for lots of different sciences and systems and protocols and corporate coaches. Like, it's a concept that's out there, you know, in the world that is about, it's almost like a competency, right? Like a way that you can measure someone's effectiveness or conflict resolution skills, or you really can actually measure someone's maturity level or the alacrity or the kinetic structure coming off their field. You can measure basically the power, if you want to choose a simpler word, like the power emanating off of the field, off of someone's body, their earned wisdom state, almost if it were a vibration. You can measure that the same way that you would measure the volts of a battery or the wattage of a light bulb. So there's actually like a bio wattage coming off of the field. So the curriculum that we've developed at Graceline is not the first time that term EQ has ever been used by any means, but we have developed like an 8-part series where you can go into direct experience of how to work with EQ teachings to basically start shifting your narrative and your story and your personality, your mood, your base temperament, your belief patterns, that sort of thing. We try to teach people to do that work for themselves, so they're not like relying on an outside medication, an outside guru. They're not bowing to someone they think is better than them. They're not looking for a healer to put their hands on them and fix a problem, but they're actually monitoring themselves and being self-reflective. And our goal is that we're sort of helping to raise emotional athletes, which means you're never going to be in a human body and not be triggered by things. Like, we are highly emotional beings, but if you have trained well, then your recovery time is faster, right? You're getting out of stress, because you have a tool set that allows you to do so, in the same way that if you're training for a marathon and you have high cardiovascular health and you've got great flexibility, your body can recover from athletic stress a little bit faster because you're well trained. So we're doing that, but we're doing it on an emotional level.
Great. And so when we head up to Kripalu in about a month, we will be doing a version of this workshop, and we will start on Sunday and end on Tuesday. And what can folks expect if they join us?
So we basically use some really simple algorithms. It's looking at the math of emotionality, and we begin to understand a very simple binary system, which is this: that every single time you have an emotional reaction, your body, in the same way that it does with food, so say you introduce a substance, right, and it happens to be like a paraben, a preservative, a heavy metal, a pesticide, like yellow food dye number 5, right? If that comes into the field, the body has to instantly just make a declarative choice between it being essentially good for you or bad for you. So on a metabolic level, we would say that it's catabolic or anabolic. Catabolic, coming from the same root word, is cataclysmic, catastrophic. Kata means it's costing you something. It's depleting you in some way, right? And so usually we tuck that away if it's dangerous to the system or if it pulls from life rather than feeding life. Anabolic means it's an amplifier. It's on the side of life. It's filling your cup, right? It's a deposit in your checking account rather than a drain on the account. And so what our devotional weekend in Kripalu is about is establishing what kinds of emotion and different emotion, how that registers in the body, right? Is that essentially, this is my term for it that I teach even little kiddos, is you can look at any event in your life and really determine, rather than using those big words of catabolic or anabolic, you can basically say, oh, that feeds me or bleeds me, feeds me or bleeds me, right? So deciding to feel that emotion, deciding to be jealous, deciding to be afraid, deciding to feel guilty or wrong or bad or ashamed or not good enough, right? Deciding to be hopeless, deciding to have animosity or an enemy or to be in a power struggle with someone. Like, that is essentially a choice that is eating away at you or bleeding you, as a choice rather than making a choice that would feed you or fill your cup. So rather than thinking that emotion happens to me, or I'm reacting to the world, or I'm a victim to anything, or I'm out of control, or, you know, life is crazy and it's all coming at me too fast, we don't take that passive approach to life, but we really see ourselves as fully sovereign beings. And in order to have true sovereignty, we have to have true responsibility. So it's really sort of elegant and simple lessons in taking responsibility and moving emotions so that we can graduate beyond it, transcend it. And so we're looking at how higher happiness and self-care is actually a path toward greater service on the planet, and looking at very fast ways to get there.
Mm-hmm. And you use something called the Hawkins scale of consciousness in your EQ training.
Yeah, so it is a tool that I find is really easy to break things down and give people sort of like a working graph at understanding what emotion does what in the physical body. So this is a quick sample of his map where you can essentially see that any emotion that falls under 200 on this scale, by the way, this scale is from 0 to 1,000. It's a logarithmic scale that tracks the kinetic structure, right? The electricity, magnetism, light quotient coming off of any human emotion as experienced in the human form. And so the lowest, most debased expression of our humanity that any of us experiences is shame, which all of us can probably attest to, right? Shame is the same vibratory field as being abandoned, rejected, publicly humiliated, hated, eliminated, left out. So that costs us the most in terms of the stress chemicals that it produces and what it does to weaken the electrical field of the body. And then we sort of begin to move up that scale. Guilt is a little bit higher above it. Guilt puts us at a state of duality where we're in a constant power struggle, where we think we're wrong, bad, or not good enough, and we need to prove ourselves in the eyes of another in order to be good enough. It makes us believe in good versus evil, right versus wrong, left versus right, right versus dark, red versus blue, me versus you, victim versus perpetrator, kill or be killed, hero versus villain. So when we get stuck in duality, we do a lot of lessons, which we will really tackle at Kripalu, to see where we're losing energy just in that one thing, that sort of act of duality, and how our quickest way of getting out of it is to try to blame another. And when we blame another or become the victim of anything, we weaken the mitochondria of the cell. We're actually destructive to our own cells rather than being destructive to the person we're blaming. So we're looking at what emotion actually does to the body and how it can be toxic to us, how it's limiting us, how it's, kind of keeping us from moving forward in our lives, and that we're the only ones responsible for how we feel. So, no one is going to go to the gym to build muscle for you. And likewise, no one's going to sit down and help you not be mad at your parent or not be jealous of a sibling, right? You're the only one that can sort of drop your story and get over anger or resentment or bitterness, that sort of thing. So we really use the scale. There's so much I could say about the scale, but that's sort of some basics of it. We use the scale to kind of track your life story and to help you move into higher states of awareness so that you can move into higher states of freedom.
And how was the scale originally developed?
So the scale was developed by a man who he gets mistaken for Stephen Hawking a lot. His name is Dr. David Hawkins. They were both really amazing thinkers and thought leaders. And so the scale was originally developed by a man who was interested in human potential and consciousness, but he wanted to find a way to actually track it in a laboratory. So he would use human bodies as instruments, and he used like the science of applied kinesiology. He used muscle testing. He would line up 100 bodies and ask them questions, and he would check his math on basically reactions to certain emotional triggers and things like that. And he really studied what emotion was doing to the physical body, and created a system for understanding the natural progression of human evolution. And he was just a researcher basically who created a really great system for being at the helm of our own self-awareness.
And he has passed on, right? He's not alive any longer.
He passed away in 2012, and he left a body of work that is used by healers and practitioners all over the world. Allergists use his work, chiropractors use his work, neuroscientists use his work. And he really talked about true empowerment and higher consciousness as being the greatest act of service there is. One of my favorite things about this scale, I don't know if it's possible to scroll down to the bottom, but you'll see a little box that says counterbalances. Yes. And that he described that basically when you test the wattage coming off of a human body of someone who has actual deep and true complete acceptance of the self, meaning that they have unconditional love for their own body, themselves, and sort of like their face, and they're at peace with themselves, and they don't judge how they look, and they don't judge their body. And if you have that one soul that has reached that true state where it's a homeostatic set point, meaning even in stress, they can maintain that unconditionality and acceptance and forgiveness and kindness towards self, that one person loving themselves at that level, that level of unconditionality rather than duality, counterbalances 750,000 people living in a state of misery or guilt or grief or self-hate. So that it's almost like comparing that to light shining out on the planet, like out in the cosmos, right? So if you look at like the planet of Venus, for example, a planet casts such a huge light, similar to like a big star like the sun, our burning sun, right? So if you cluster 750,000 stars together and like burrito them into a tight little mashed up ball of light, that still wouldn't emanate the bright light of Venus. So what he was able to show is that if you look at the human heart as an actual engine, that the energy coming off of someone who is truly that loving and that compassionate is counterbalancing the energies of people sort of depleting the greater quantum field or unity field, because they're tugging on the field for acceptance or for power or to fight or to prove or to be more successful, taller, prettier, smarter, richer than anyone else in the room kind of thing. And I love that about his work. It's this idea that that our sweetness and our kindness towards the self is one of the greatest acts of art and service out there in the world. So it's really about doing your inner plane work rather than how it looks out there, right? Like rather than looking like, you know, I'm doing great philanthropy out there or digging deep tube wells in Africa. Look how great I am. And I'm taking a picture of, you know, on Facebook about how great I am, right? That basically not needing any attention for anything and not needing anything from the environment, but actually really honing that inner, sort of that inner framework for electricity and heart coherence. It is in itself an act of great work for the planet.
Wow. Right. I mean, it occurs to me that the person who probably, well, it says there are currently 12 persons on the planet who calibrate at 700, but my guess would be that the Dalai Lama must be one of them.
Yes, so is Amma. Those are two of the living 12.
Oh, right, Amma. Yeah, I know who that is. Right. So,
Yeah.
Oh, cool. All right. So, I know that you also have done a lot of work as a filmmaker. And one of the things that I love about that is that you have a connection to bees. And
that's Joanna's very nice way of saying you are a bee nerd.
I read this thing the other day about how people used to, in one of the ancient cultures, that people used to go out because people used to keep their hives at their home, and that would be how they got honey. But that when a member of their family passed, it was a ritual to go out and tell the bees that someone had left, that you were expected to communicate the good things that happened to your family to the bees and the bad things that happened to your family to the bees. And I know that Mickaela made this incredible movie about the bees, and I wanted her to just talk a little bit about bees.
Yeah, so what you just said, there's something so beautiful about that tradition. Let's think about why. So why would there be a tradition where as soon as something devastating happens, or if there's big news, or there's a big transition, a big change, such as a death, why would you go tell the bees? Because I get like teary-eyed talking about bees. Because there's a hum and a buzz, right? There is an electrical current that lifts the vibration of the whole planet through the way that bees operate, because they are not only the world's pollinators, but they're going to spread that message. They spread a little bit of light and a little bit of nectar and a little bit of pollen and a little bit of magic. Every single place that they touch, they're spreading something good that serves all. And what a lot of humans don't know is that every third bite of food that you put into your body, every third thing that is giving you light and life and nurturing and nourishment came from a pollinator. And a lot of people, if they see them, will scream or step on them or harm them or swat them away, and we are alive because of them. Mm-hmm. And what I absolutely adore and bow down to with great humility and heartfelt appreciation about bees is that what they do for the hive, what they do for all, what they do in service for all is really profound, is that any one bee will take a hit and would offer up its life to protect a hive. Mm-hmm. It's that idea that essentially we're all connected, we're all one, and that there is no real death, there is no real sacrifice, that basically we're one living, breathing organism. And in my humble opinion, everything that we ever needed to know about life, we could learn from bees.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
So I just went on a rant about bees and didn't talk about the films, but yeah. Master of the Filmmaker. So I basically make something. It's all original curriculum. We have a nickname for them. My team and I call them podios, which means poetry videos. But we basically work with knocking people into trance states so they can do their own healing work. And at Graceline, we have what we call grid share meditation, electron share meditation. That is all original curriculum, and we use film. We do open eye alpha brainwave meditation. We use film as a transportational medium to knocking people into altered states without the use of drugs or alcohol, so that they can do really transformational work on themselves. And so a lot of those films involve contemporary and modern dance, all original music and medicine songs, all original poetry that I've written, but specifically doing healing work or engaged ceremonial trance state work like dancing with animals. So in one particular film, I dance with over 40 insects, and we actually they're alive and they have choice, but we're basically having an engaged experience with an animal, and then we're using that footage to then knock humans into meditation states. So it's sort of living, breathing ceremony in our opinion, and we are a group of artists. We call ourselves artivists, so we are art activists who basically use these transformational mediums to try to raise awareness, and not just about ecology, but about humanity. And we just so happen to film whales and bees probably more than other species, although we're kind of devoted to all species. So.
And you just talked a little bit about grid share meditation, which is something that we'll also be doing at Kripalu. Can you explain a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so we basically have a little tagline at Graceline. We say grid up. I mean a lot of different things when I say grid up. It's a very loving way to just give a little reminder that we need to grow up. So it's about getting people out of child mentality or teen mentality or power struggles and being an adult, being fully responsible, not being a victim to anything, taking responsibility for our act and our action in all things. And so what grid share meditation is about is building that grid, building a stronger grid, building a stronger electrical state and magnetic state around the body, building up electricity, immunity, productivity, creativity by leaning on each other as a healthy, happy hive. And so what we do is grid share meditation involves basically tactile connection so that we can ride off of the shared field. And you can obviously do this, right, with energetics. You don't need to be touching anyone to be a part of the unity field. But the reason that we do is I believe that we're a very touch-deprived world, and it's an immediate calming of the nervous system when you get that big, juicy hug from a stranger. Mm-hmm. The body recognizes that sensation of like putting our head on the shoulder of another. And literally we say in our culture, I'll be your shoulder to cry on. And so there's an immediate release that the body goes through when we have a lot of tactile connection. And how many of us are ever touching 5 people at once, right? It's like a thing in our culture that doesn't exist. So if you're coming to any sort of grid share meditation, just know that you're going to be, touching some strangers, and we're not shy about that. So I basically put people in positions where we're building a human fractal. And if you get into these particular positions, sometimes it's based on esoteric acupuncture. Sometimes I'm having you work with certain meridians or certain acupuncture points, or putting you in certain postures and positions for a reason to activate something specific. But you're sort of leaning into each other and laying in a certain way. Our slang for it is we put you in a little cuddle puddle. So we just put you in a puddle of people so that you can have a little bit more of an activated visionary state. It amplifies imagination and vision while you're meditating. And we blend that with a lot of very active breath work.
Right. Well, that's great. So I know we have a few questions that have come in from some of our listeners. Shay, are you going to share a couple of those with us?
Yes. So we had several questions. Just give me 1 second while I look them up.
Great. And while you're looking, so we will share also that this Kripalu experience is December 1st through December 3rd. There's plenty of space left. There, you have the opportunity to stay in a variety of different types of accommodations at Kripalu and do this work with Mickaela. And also we'll be having a panel on green beauty, and we have some really interesting participants on that panel. We have Jane Larkworthy, who was the former beauty director at W Magazine. We also have Heather Mickaela, who is an editor with American Spa Magazine. And we have Jeannie Jarneau, who is the founder of Beauty Heroes, who will be talking a little bit about her company and what she terms blue beauty, which is a couple of steps beyond green beauty. And so we're thrilled to be able to host them. And then we'll also be doing something with regard to education around CBD and how to use CBD. So
we have one question that we haven't touched base on. We may have already touched base on it, but the question was how EQ relates to electromagnetic fields. So if we could dive a little deeper on that.
Yeah, so we touched on that a little bit. So basically, the higher the emotional intelligence, the stronger the field around the human body. So the EMF field just stands for electromagnetic field. It's also called a morphogenetic field. Some people, when they're talking about that wider field of all of humanity, right, the wider organism of humanity, we call it the unity field. So some people call it a LEF field, a luminous electric field, right? There's all these different words. Back in the day, we called it the auric field, right? So, but it's basically what emanates off of the human being. And what a lot of us don't realize, we think that, you know, kind of the human brain is the bee's knees and it's where all the power is. But a lot of people don't realize that the human heart actually has 5,000 times the magnetics and 100 times the electrical output as the human brain. So it's actually a far more advanced engine. So even more important than the thoughts you think are the feelings you feel for creating the alacrity or the basically the potentiality or the bigness of the field. So higher emotional intelligence, stronger the field. So if you think about like a weak cell phone signal versus a high cell phone signal, weak Wi-Fi versus strong Wi-Fi, the more resilient you are with your emotionality, the more of what I would call, you know, being a badass or an emotional athlete. The stronger you are there, the higher on that scale you are, the stronger your field, less likely you are to get weakened or sort of wobbled by outside experience. So others don't really have say and sway over you. You don't care about the opinions of others. You don't get weakened or flattened by language. You don't get easily offended. You just sort of like move through things as a pretty stable force of light on the planet. So, so also when you're looking at that field, I said this before, I'll just say it again, is that basically the higher the electricity, the higher the immunity. So the great benefit of high emotional intelligence is that it strengthens your overall immune system, your endocrine system, but it also keeps your hormones really balanced. You're not running as much like cortisol and adrenaline and stress chemicals in the body. Every time you have an emotional reaction, you're actually creating a chemical. So it's weakening the microbiome. It can affect metabolism. It can affect libido. So there's all these other little systems that get knocked out by emotion, because the physical body does not know the difference between a heavy metal, a pesticide, a preservative, a paraben, basically a like chemical that you breathe in, or 20 years of resentment you've had towards a parent, right? It just sees that as catabolic or costing you something, and it deflates you or it weakens you. And so the system reacts to emotion in the same way that it reacts to a pollutant if it is catabolic emotion. So that's why EQ is of great benefit to your grid, to your electromagnetic field.
That's great. Do we have other questions, folks? Come on, don't be shy.
Yeah, feel free to write them in the chat on the side.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention is that Mickaela also travels around and does these sorts of retreats. So for folks listening, you are also able to book her into your spas to do custom retreats in your own locations. So for anybody who's interested in that, she's available, and we'll share her email address with you all as well, so that you can write and ask.
Yeah, and I would just add, we have original programming that is for conflict resolution and team building for corporate executives, and then we have individuals, and then we have specialized programming that's also for teens. We have a nonprofit teen center, and we take the art of growing humans very seriously, so I absolutely adore working with children. So if that's ever something you'd like to bring to your area, we have specialized programming just for that, teaching EQ to young folks. So,
Shay, was there one more question, or did she address that already?
No, she just addressed it.
Okay.
We've covered the other two.
Perfect.
Well, that's great. Mickaela, thank you so much for joining us today and being on our webinar. We're thrilled, and we're really thrilled to be working with you and having us go to Kripalu and sort of spread the EQ message. It so deeply aligns with all that GSN Planet wants to do and is trying to do, and we agree with you, or we couldn't agree with you more, that we need to be better humans and grid up and turn people into artivists. So we look forward to seeing you there.
thank you. I can't wait to see you all. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you. Thank you, Mickaela. Bye-bye.
Nice.